My name is Margaret Lane. I am 63 years old. And what I am about to tell you began with 8 simple words that broke 30 years of motherhood in half. We got married yesterday. I remember the sound before the meaning, the soft hum on the phone line, the faint echo of traffic behind my son's voice, and the way my own breath caught as if I had stepped into cold water. For a second, I thought he was joking. I even smiled. Then I heard laughter in the background, a woman's laughter, and realized he wasn't alone. It was Tuesday morning. The kettle hadn't whistled yet, but I could already smell the tea leaves burning at the bottom of the pot. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the garden soaked and glittering. I was setting the table for one, as I had done every morning since my husband passed away 6 years ago. The phone rang once, twice, and by the third ring, I felt that odd flutter mothers get when they know something is coming. The kind of call that changes the air in the room. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said. "When is the wedding? Do you want me to bring the blue dress or the white one?" A pause. Then his voice, light, distracted. "Oh, Mom, we got married yesterday." At first, the words didn't fit anywhere. They floated around me like feathers in slow motion, looking for a place to land. "You what?" I asked, laughing the way people do when they hope they misheard. He repeated it. Calm, almost proud. "We got married yesterday. Just a small ceremony. Nothing big." In that moment, I felt every clock in the house stop. The silence was so dense I could hear the tick of the one in my chest. My son, my only child, had married the girl I had been saving my best china for, the girl whose wedding veil I had already folded in my mind. And he had done it without me. "I see," I finally said. It was the only thing that would come out. He cleared his throat, the way he used to when he was 10, and caught lying about homework. "We didn't want to make a big deal. You know how Elena is about crowds?" Crowds. As if I were a crowd, I heard her voice faintly bright, careless, young, asking him if he wanted more coffee. He answered softly, then returned to me. "I'll come by later this week, okay? We can talk." But we didn't talk. Not then. Not for weeks. When the call ended, I stayed with the receiver pressed to my ear until the tone turned into a flat, mechanical hum. The room seemed smaller. The smell of burned tea filled it like smoke. On the table, 2 cups sat side by side, one for him, one for me, ghosts of a celebration that would never happen. People imagine betrayal as something loud, shouting, broken plates, slammed doors. Mine arrived softly, wrapped in politeness. It said, "Okay, and later this week, and don't worry." I walked to the window. The rain had started again, thin and stubborn, tracing lines down the glass. Across the street, the neighbor's dog barked at nothing. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang for someone else's joy. I tried to breathe through the confusion, telling myself there must be a reason. Perhaps they needed a quick ceremony for papers, or maybe a surprise party was waiting for me. Mothers cling to hope the way sailors cling to wreckage, but hope can be cruel. By noon, the denial had worn off, leaving only questions that hurt to touch. Where had it happened? Who had been there? Had anyone said my name? I looked around the living room, the lace curtains I had ironed for the reception, the box of old photographs ID planned to show his future in-laws, the small jar of coins labeled wedding gift. Everything looked absurd now, part of a stage set for a play that had already been performed somewhere else. The clock struck 12. Outside, the mailman passed without looking in. I realized I was still standing, still waiting for a sound that would rewind time. It never came. I sat down and dialed his number again, but it went straight to voicemail. "Hi, this is Daniel. Leave a message." I didn't. What could I possibly say? Congratulations for forgetting me? Thank you for saving me a seat in the past? Instead, I turned off the kettle and listened to the last hiss of steam fade into silence. That was the morning my house stopped feeling like home. Walls I had painted with my sons, laughter now echoed with absence. The framed photo of him in his graduation gown stared back at me, smiling, as if mocking the woman who had believed she still mattered. But somewhere beneath the numbness, something else stirred, not anger, not yet, but a slow, heavy clarity, a sense that a story I didn't know had been written behind my back. Later, when I learned why they had rushed the wedding, I would understand that this phone call was only the beginning, the first crack in a wall of lies that had been standing for years. That day, though, I only knew one thing. Love doesn't always end with goodbye. Sometimes it ends with silence. The morning after the call, the house felt different. Not haunted, just emptied, as if someone had quietly removed all the air while I slept. I woke before sunrise, made tea I didn't drink, and opened the curtains. The sky was still blue-gray, the color of porcelain before it breaks. My garden looked exactly the same, roses trimmed, grass damp, the little wind chime by the porch moving softly. But the sound didn't comfort me anymore. It only reminded me that everything I'd built was still standing, except what mattered most. It's strange how betrayal doesn't arrive in thunder. It comes dressed in routine. I set the table for two again. I don't know why, maybe because habit takes longer to die than love. The cup across from mine stayed untouched, but I kept glancing at it like someone expecting company. For most of my life, mornings had been my favorite part of the day. Daniel would stumble into the kitchen, half awake, hair a mess, complaining that his tie never sat straight. "Hold still," I'd say, laughing, while fixing it for him. Sometimes, I'd brush imaginary dust from his shoulder, a mother's way of blessing her child without calling it prayer. Those memories used to warm me. Now, they burned. After my husband died, Daniel became my reason for rhythm. Birthdays, holidays, phone calls, every Sunday at 6. We built a little bridge of rituals to cross the silence that grief left behind, and for years, it worked. I never asked for more. Then she arrived, Elena, pretty, polite, the kind of woman who always knew which words to say and which ones to swallow. I liked her at first. Or maybe I liked the way my son looked when he was with her lighter, as if someone had turned the lights back on in his life. The first time she visited, I baked an apple pie. She thanked me, smiled, and took the smallest piece possible. "It's delicious," she said, though her fork hardly touched it. I noticed her eyes drifting to the curtains, the old photos, the chipped porcelain lamp beside the couch. A quiet assessment, the kind women make when deciding whether something or someone belongs in their world. When they left that evening, Daniel kissed my cheek. Elena smiled, said she'd call soon. She didn't. Weeks passed. Invitations I sent were answered with polite delays. "She's busy," Daniel would explain. "Work is crazy." His voice carried the guilt of someone forced to choose between love and loyalty. I told him not to worry, but inside, I began counting silences. The first time I realized I was losing him wasn't through absence, it was through language. He stopped calling me Mom and started saying Ma, a small word, but it changed everything. Ma sounded rushed, like a name said while looking at a clock. Still, I convinced myself it was just time, the natural drift between generations. I filled my days with things that required no conversation: gardening, reading, folding the same towels twice. Each task became a prayer for balance, a way to pretend my world hadn't shifted. Then, one afternoon, Daniel came by. He looked restless, checking his phone every few minutes. I offered coffee. He said he couldn't stay long. "Elena and I are looking for venues," he mentioned. My heart leapt. Finally, the wedding talk I'd been waiting for. I remember the sunlight that day, warm, forgiving, spilling across the table as I asked, "So, when is the date?" He hesitated, eyes darting to the window. "Soon," he said. "We haven't decided yet." I smiled anyway. "Let me know when you need help. I'll start sewing the table runners. Your father would have wanted you to have them." He nodded, but the gratitude I expected never came. He finished his coffee quickly and left a few minutes later. I stood by the door, watching his car disappear down the road. The cup still held his fingerprint on the rim. I washed it gently, as if cleaning away the distance between us. That evening, I called a friend, Nora, who had seen him around town. "He looks happy," she said. "I heard they're planning something small." Something small. The words sank like stones. That night, I opened the box under my bed, the one filled with things I'd saved for his wedding. A silver brooch from my own dress, the embroidered napkins, a letter his father had written for the future daughter-in-law he'd never meet. I laid everything on the bedspread, trying to imagine how it would look on their table. For a moment, I allowed myself to dream. I pictured the laughter, the toasts, the way he might look when he saw me walking into the room. But even dreams can smell false when the air has changed. I felt it, that quiet premonition mothers get when joy feels borrowed. A week later, he stopped by again. This time, with Elena. She hugged me stiffly, the way you hug someone you're obliged to. Her perfume filled the room, too sweet, too deliberate. She looked around and said, "You have such a cozy house." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes said small. We drank tea. She talked about travel, about how city weddings were too loud. I nodded, trying to keep up. Every time I looked at Daniel, he smiled, but it wasn't the smile I knew. It was the one people wear when they're following someone else's lead. When they left, she kissed my cheek, light, cold, and said, "Well, keep you posted." That sentence haunted me for days. Posted. Like a memo. Like an update. By then, the evenings had begun to stretch longer. The wind carried the smell of autumn, and every shadow seemed to last a second too long. I kept busy pruning, cooking, pretending. But beneath every motion lay a single question I didn't dare speak aloud. What if the next time I hear from him, it's already too late? I didn't know then that the answer would come sooner than I could imagine, and that when it did, it would sound exactly like betrayal disguised as happiness. It started small, the kind of small that only a mother would notice. A pause too long in a conversation. A word replaced by another. A tone that shifted like light across water. Daniel's visits grew shorter. His messages rarer. When he did call, his voice carried a new politeness, a cautious distance, as if we had become neighbors who didn't want to disturb each other. "Everything all right?" I'd ask. Yeah, just busy." Busy. That word became the third person in our conversations. I tried to ignore the unease, the quiet rearrangement of closeness into courtesy. I told myself he was building his life, and that's what good mothers do. They let go. But letting go isn't something you do once. It's something you do every day, piece by piece, until you no longer recognize your own hands. One Sunday, I baked his favorite cake, lemon and almond. He didn't come. He didn't call. When I finally texted, he replied hours later, "Sorry, Ma. We were looking at apartments." I stared at the message. No heart, no photo, no exclamation mark, just words. It wasn't anger. I felt it was subtraction. The next morning, I carried the untouched cake to the garden. The frost had come early that year, and the air smelled faintly of metal. I left the cake by the bird feeder. Within minutes, sparrows began pecking at it, scattering crumbs across the grass. "Watching them," I whispered. "At least someone's eating." A week later, he dropped by unannounced. He looked tired, but in a good way, the kind of tired that comes from starting over. I asked if he'd like dinner. "Can't, Ma?" he said. "Elena's waiting in the car." I nodded, pretending not to notice that he didn't take off his coat. There was a box in his hands, a gift, a candle, lavender-scented, wrapped neatly with a card that said, "For you." It wasn't his handwriting. "She picked it out," he said quickly, as if that made it more valuable. "It's lovely," I replied, even though the scent was too strong. He looked around the house, the curtains, the photos, the clock that hadn't worked since last winter. "It's warm here," he said. "It's home," I answered. He smiled politely, and for the first time I realized that my son was learning to smile like a stranger. After he left, I stood in the doorway watching his car pull away. The candle still burned on the table, the wax dripping slowly down its side. The smell filled the house, artificial, cloying like someone else's version of comfort. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the walls, the small things that had carried his childhood. Every object seemed to whisper, "Remember when he was yours?" By evening, the scent of lavender was unbearable. I opened every window. The wind entered like an apology. The following weekend, I called him again. "Are you coming for Sunday dinner?" "Not this week, Ma. Elena's family invited us." I smiled even though he couldn't see me. "That's nice. Send them my regards." "I will." He didn't. I spent the evening at the kitchen table, looking at the empty plates, listening to the house creak. Silence had a way of expanding, like fabric being stretched too far. It filled corners, hid between breaths. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through social media. I had never been good at it. Too many windows. Too much noise. But then I saw it, a photo of them at a restaurant, holding hands over wine glasses. The caption read, "Dinner with family." Family. That word used to mean something that included me. The next time they visited, Elena brought flowers, white lilies, elegant and scentless. "I thought these would brighten the place," she said. "They do," I replied. But lilies, to me, had always belonged to funerals. We sat in the living room. Daniel spoke about work. Elena spoke about plans. They both smiled often, but never at the same time. And when I asked about the wedding, they exchanged a quick glance, a silent agreement to postpone truth. "Still deciding," Daniel said again. I nodded, though something inside me had already gone quiet. After they left, I placed the lilies in a vase and watched them open. Their petals looked pure, almost too pure, like snow that hides a wound underneath. A few days later, my neighbor Nora came by. She had that look people wear when they bring news they don't want to say. "I saw Daniel at the mall," she began. "With Elena?" She hesitated. "With another couple. And they were looking at wedding suits." "Oh," I said softly. "Did he tell you?" I smiled. "Not yet." When she left, I went to the bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept my husband's watch. It still ticked faintly, a heartbeat from another life. I pressed it against my palm. The metal was cold, grounding. I whispered into the emptiness, "They're planning without me, John." The room didn't answer. It never does. The days blurred. I baked less. I spoke less. When the phone finally rang again, I almost didn't pick up. It was Daniel. His tone was light, rehearsed. "Hey, Ma. Just wanted to check in." We talked about weather, groceries, meaningless things. Then, almost casually, I asked, "Have you set a date yet?" A pause. The longest one yet. He laughed softly, a sound that didn't belong to him anymore. "Not yet," he said. But his silence afterward told me otherwise. That night, I sat by the window, watching the rain fall over the garden. Each drop hit the earth like punctuation. A slow sentence, spelling out what I already knew. Something was being hidden. Something was unfolding without me. And though I couldn't name it yet, I could feel it pressing against the walls of my quiet life. The first crack in the foundation of a love I thought was unbreakable. It happened on a Friday, the kind of day that pretends to be ordinary. The sky was soft, the air smelled of rain, and I had just finished ironing the blue dress I planned to wear to their engagement dinner. I didn't know, of course, that the dinner had already happened somewhere else, with someone else's mother sitting in my chair. That morning, I went into town. I bought a card, cream-colored, with silver borders, and wrote in it carefully, "To my beloved son and his bride. May your life together be as steady as the tide." I practiced signing my name 3 times before the ink looked right. Then I stopped by the bakery for a cake. The same one I used to order for his birthdays, vanilla with strawberry layers. When I told the baker, she smiled. "Ah, for Daniel's wedding?" I smiled back. "Soon?" I said. She wrapped it with white ribbon. By the time I got home, the sky had turned darker, the kind of gray that holds its breath. I made tea and sat by the window, waiting for his call. It was supposed to come at 4, Head promised. By 5, I convinced myself the traffic was bad. By 6, I stopped pretending. When the phone finally rang, it wasn't him, it was Nora. Her voice was careful, too careful. "Margaret," she said, "are you sitting down?" I laughed softly. "That bad, is it?" She hesitated, then told me about the photos, about the restaurant, about the white dress. I felt the words before I understood them, like ice on skin. I opened my laptop, hands shaking, and there they were. Daniel and Elena, standing under a string of fairy lights, holding glasses of champagne. Her dress simple, elegant, his eyes soft with pride. In the background, people, strangers, laughing, clapping, holding cameras. And then, tucked into one corner of a frame, Elena's mother beaming. She was wearing blue, my color. I stared at the screen until the image blurred. Not from tears, my eyes were too dry for that. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had replaced me. When the phone rang again, it was him this time. "Hi, Ma," he said, cheerful, breathless, as if nothing had happened. "How are you?" I waited before answering. "Fine," I said. "When's the wedding?" Silence, then a nervous laugh. "Mom, we got married yesterday." The same 8 words. But this time, they sounded final, like nails closing a coffin. I remember gripping the edge of the table, the wood digging into my palm. "You? What?" "We didn't want to make it a big deal," he said quickly. "It was just family. Small, private. Family, that word again. I almost asked him to define it. "I am sorry," he added. "We didn't think you'd want to travel in the rain." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every sentence he said felt like a door closing. "Finally," I whispered. "I hope it was beautiful." He sighed, relieved, mistaking my calm for acceptance. "It was," he said. "I'll send you pictures." Pictures. Proof that a mother's love can be edited out of her own story. After he hung up, I sat there for a long time, surrounded by small, meaningless details, the hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking, the smell of cooling tea. Each sound reminded me of something I'd lost without realizing it. When the evening came, I walked outside. The air was cold and sharp. I carried the cake to the garden and placed it on the old wooden table under the tree where Daniel used to play. I lit a candle beside it, a single, trembling flame. The wind caught it almost immediately, bending it sideways. Still, it burned. Neighbors must have seen the light. One of them, Mrs. Caldwell, called over the fence. "Celebrating something?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said. "Something." She nodded, not understanding, and went back inside. I stood there until the candle melted completely, leaving a small crater of wax on the table. That's when the rain started again, slow at first, then harder, until the cake was nothing but a soggy ruin. I went inside, leaving the door open. The wind carried water into the hall. I didn't care. I looked around the house, the photos, the decorations I had planned to use, the empty chair by the table. It felt absurd, all of it, the preparations, the hope, the belief that love has memory. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Not a break, more like a quiet folding inward. A decision made without words. The next morning, I woke early. I washed the dishes, cleaned the floor, threw the wet cake into the trash. Then I took the framed photo of Daniel in his graduation gown and placed it face down on the shelf. And when I sat down, the silence of the house felt different, not empty, but waiting. I poured a cup of tea and stared out at the garden. The rain had stopped, but puddles shimmered like small mirrors across the grass. I could see my reflection in one of them. Older, smaller, but still there. And for the first time, I thought, maybe losing him wasn't the tragedy. Maybe the real tragedy was believing I still had him. Later that day, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside, a wedding photo, glossy, perfect. A note scribbled in Daniel's handwriting. Well, visit soon. Love, D&E. I folded it neatly, placed it in the drawer with the others. Then I closed it, slowly, as if tucking away the last breath of something that once lived here. The kettle began to whistle in the kitchen. I didn't move, let it scream, I thought. Because this time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like armor. Before Elena, before the silence, before that phone call, there was a small white house by the shore. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, peeling paint, windows that rattled in the wind. But it was ours. John and I bought it when Daniel was 6. We couldn't afford much back then, but we didn't need more than laughter, a kettle, and a place where the sea could talk to us every evening. Every nail in that house had a story. John built the porch himself. Daniel helped, handing him nails like treasures. When the hammer slipped and John cursed under his breath, Daniel giggled so hard he almost dropped the box. I remember that sound, my boy's laughter. The sea wind, John's voice saying, "Hold it steady. Son, always hold it steady." Those were the days when love meant work, not words. When silence wasn't emptiness, it was peace. John passed away on a rainy Tuesday. Funny how storms seem to mark every chapter of my life. Daniel was 17. He didn't cry at the funeral. He just stood there, jaw tight, hands shaking in his pockets. After everyone left, he said, "I'll take care of you, Ma." And for a while, he did. He took a job right after college, called every night, fixed things around the house, even when I said they could wait. But grief is a quiet thief. It doesn't take everything at once, it steals by degrees. By the time he met Elena, I had already grown used to loneliness disguised as independence. The first time he brought her home, I made everything perfect. His favorite stew, my best china, fresh flowers on the table, John's photo by the window, not to intimidate her, but as a silent blessing. She arrived an hour late, apologized sweetly, smelled of perfume that lingered long after she left, a scent that didn't belong in my kitchen. Daniel was glowing that night. And I loved seeing him happy. Even if something in my chest tightened each time, she interrupted him. She talked with her hands, elegant and deliberate. When she said, "Your home is so quaint," I smiled as if it were a compliment. It wasn't. Later, as I washed the dishes, I caught Daniel watching her from the doorway. The way he looked at her, it was love, but not the kind I knew. It was hungry, eager to please. I realized then that I might lose him, not because she'd take him, but because he'd give himself away. There are truths mothers keep buried under politeness. One of mine was that I recognized Elena the moment I saw her, not her face, but her kind. The kind of woman who thinks love is a ladder, something you climb, not something you nurture. She didn't see Daniel the way I did. She saw potential. Potential to earn, to rise, to belong. And Daniel, my sweet, uncertain boy, mistook her ambition for admiration. I remember one evening, months before the wedding. They came over for dinner. Elena was distracted, scrolling through her phone. Daniel tried to tell her about a promotion he didn't get. She smiled absently and said, "Don't worry, you'll get the next one. I already told my father about you." Her father. The name I never met, but heard too often. A man who owned properties, who knew people. A man whose approval mattered more than mine. That night, after they left, I sat in Daniel's old room, his trophies, his books, his childhood drawings all still there. I wondered what it felt like to be replaced by someone whose love came with conditions. There's another truth I never told him about the house. After John died, I refinanced it to pay Daniel's tuition. Every cent of my savings went into his future, the same future that now had no room for me. The mortgage was in my name, but the reason I kept it was him. When he told me they were looking at apartments, I said nothing. But that night, I found the paperwork. Head asked me to sign, months earlier, a joint ownership form. Head called it. I never filed it. Something had felt off. Now, I was glad I hadn't, because maybe this house was all I had left, not as property, but as proof that ID existed in his story. A week after the wedding I wasn't invited to, I sat on the porch of that same house by the sea. The waves rolled in, steady and merciless. I thought about the boy who once built sandcastles and told me, "Head never move far away." And I thought about the man he became, polite, careful, distant, writing text messages that sounded like postcards. It would be easy to blame Elena. But the truth is, she didn't steal him. She just found the part of him that had already drifted, the part that wanted to stop being someone's son and start being someone's husband. That's how life works. You love people into strength, and then they use that strength to leave you. As the sun went down, I made tea and opened John's old toolbox. Inside, under a pile of nails and screws, was a letterhead written when Daniel was 10. The paper had yellowed, but his handwriting was clear. "If you're reading this, Maggie, it means he's grown. Remind him where he came from, but don't hold him there. Let him go kindly, even if it hurts." I read those words again and again until they blurred. John had always known how to love in silence. I was still learning. That night, I wrote my own letter, not to Daniel, to myself. "You did everything you could. You raised him with warmth, not chains. Don't mistake absence for failure. Some hearts just grow elsewhere." I folded it, placed it in the same box, and closed the lid. Outside, the tide was coming in. The wind howled softly through the cracks of the house. And, though I was alone, I felt something like peace, not because the pain was gone, but because it had finally found a place to rest. It took me days to realize that silence could be a language. For a while, it had been my prison, a wall that separated me from the people I loved. But one morning, I woke up and understood that silence could also be armor. That morning was clear and cold, the kind of morning that makes glass sing. I woke before the sun and sat by the window, the same window where I had once watched Daniel playing in the garden. The sea wind had followed me inland. I could hear it whispering through the cracks. I made tea, not because I wanted it, but because routine is how the lonely survive. Each movement, pouring water, stirring sugar, lifting the cup, felt rehearsed but steady. And as I watched the steam fade into the pale light, I said aloud, "No more waiting." People think decision comes with clarity. It doesn't. It comes with exhaustion. When you've spent every ounce of energy trying to understand why someone hurt you, and suddenly you decide it no longer matters why. That's what happened to me. For weeks, I had replayed the same scenes. The phone call, the photos, the empty chair. But that morning, it all felt far away, like a dream I could finally step out of. I opened the drawer where ID kept their wedding card, the one Daniel had sent with no return address. I looked at it for a long time. Then, slowly, I tore it in half, not in anger, in release. Later that day, I went to town. The shopkeeper looked surprised to see me. "I haven't seen you in weeks," she said. "I've been rearranging things," I replied. I bought fresh paint, a small hammer, a new lock for the front door. At home, I started cleaning the house from top to bottom. It wasn't about dust, it was about reclaiming space. I washed the curtains, changed the sheets, boxed up old photographs. Every nail, every drawer, every folded towel whispered a memory. I let them go, one by one. When I reached Daniel's old room, I hesitated. The bed was still made. His childhood trophies lined the shelf, tiny monuments to a simpler time. I sat on the edge of the bed, the wood creaking under my weight. There was dust on his graduation photo. I wiped it gently, as if the glass were skin. "I loved you enough to let you go," I whispered. Then I closed the door. That evening, as the sun began to sink, I sat on the porch with a notebook. It had been years since I'd written anything for myself. Words had always belonged to others, to grocery lists, to letters, to polite conversations. Now they belonged to me. I began to write, "Dear Daniel, I don't hate you. I don't even blame you. But I need you to know that love without respect is not love at all. You taught me that. I forgive you not because you asked, but because I refuse to carry your silence anymore. I didn't sign it. Forgiveness, after all, is a letter you write but never send." As the days passed, I noticed small changes. The house no longer felt haunted. The clock on the wall, broken for months, started ticking again after I replaced its battery. The sound was comforting, like a heart rediscovering its rhythm. I began walking to the beach in the evenings. It was a long way, 3 miles, but I liked the quiet. Each step seemed to scrape something heavy from my chest. I watched the tide. It never argued with the shore. It just kept returning. There was a lesson in that, I thought. Sometimes coming back doesn't mean surrender. It means knowing where you belong. One afternoon, I saw a young couple by the pier. The girl was laughing, the boy trying to take her picture as the wind tangled her hair. Something about them, their innocence, their temporary joy, reminded me of Daniel and Elena. For the first time, I didn't feel pain, just distance, the kind that feels natural, like the space between waves. Back home, I opened the small box of letters, ID saved not from them, but from John. His words had aged, but his voice hadn't. When things fall apart, he once wrote, "Remember that you can still choose how to stand." I smiled. "I am standing, John," I said aloud. It felt good to speak his name again. That night, I changed the locks on the front door, not out of fear, out of peace. Some doors must be closed for the light to find its way in through the windows. I placed one key in a small drawer and threw the spare into the sea the next morning. It felt symbolic, like returning something that no longer belonged to me. The next few weeks were quiet. No calls, no letters. But for once, the silence didn't ache, it hummed. Neighbors began to notice. "You look different," one said. "I suppose I do," I replied. I stopped apologizing for being here. I smiled more, cooked less, slept better. It was around that time I realized that forgiveness wasn't about saying it's okay. It was about saying, "I am still here." Then, one afternoon, I received a text from Daniel. Just one line. "Can we visit this weekend?" My fingers hovered over the phone. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I set the phone down, walked outside, and stood in the garden. The air was still. The roses were blooming again. And as I watched them move gently in the wind, I made my choice. I would face them. Not as the mother they had pitied or ignored, but as the woman who had learned to speak with silence. They came on a Sunday. The kind of Sunday that smells of rain and endings. The church bells had just finished their song when I saw their car turning slowly into the driveway. It had been months, almost a year, since I last saw them. The moment I recognized Daniel stepping out of the car, my breath caught, not out of longing, but recognition. He looked different, older, thinner. He was wearing a gray jacket, the same one John used to own, and that hurt more than I expected. Elena followed behind him, elegant as ever, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. She carried a gift bag in one hand and a small bouquet of lilies in the other, lilies again, as if repeating the same mistake twice would make it right. "Mom," Daniel said softly. The word landed like something fragile placed on a table. I nodded. "You found your way back." He smiled awkwardly, glancing at the house as if it might look different. "It's nice," he said. "You repainted?" "I did." I stepped aside to let them in. "Come in." The kettle's on. Inside, the house felt brighter not because of the paint, but because I no longer lived inside the shadow of what they'd done. The air was warm, scented with chamomile. Elena looked around, scanning every detail, the new curtains, the changed furniture. Her gaze lingered on the missing photos, the empty wall where their wedding picture might have hung. "It's lovely," she said, polite but uneasy. "Thank you." We sat at the table, the same table where Daniel used to do his homework, where John once mapped out the garden, where laughter used to live. Now, only the soft clink of teacups filled the space. Daniel spoke first. "We wanted to see you." "I can see that." He looked down. "I should have called sooner." "Yes," I said. Silence followed, heavy but not cruel. Elena broke it. "We've been through a lot this year. There were complications." I tilted my head. "Complications?" She hesitated. "Financial, work-related. We had to move in with my parents for a while." "Ah, so the perfect picture had cracked." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "We're trying to get back on our feet. Things just didn't go as planned." "Plans," I said softly. "They rarely do." I sipped my tea and waited. I could feel their unease rising like steam. Finally, Daniel reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table. "We wanted to ask you something," he said. Elena added quickly, "Just temporarily, until we stabilize." I looked at the envelope, my name written in her handwriting. "What is it?" Daniel exhaled. Elena thought, "Maybe we could stay here for a while. The house is big enough." "You're alone." For a moment, I said nothing. I just watched the two of them, the way she held her breath, the way he avoided my eyes. Then I smiled, a small, quiet smile. "Daniel," I said, "do you remember the last thing your father taught you about this house?" He blinked. "To keep it steady." "Yes." I leaned back. "He built this house so we would never have to ask for shelter." I stood, walked to the cabinet, and took out a folder, the property papers. I placed them beside the envelope. "This house," I said calmly, "was refinanced to pay your education. Every nail in its frame came from the years I spent keeping us afloat. I never told you that." Elena's eyes widened. "We didn't know." "No," I interrupted gently. "You didn't want to know." The air thickened. Daniel's shoulders fell. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "I know." I touched his hand lightly. "You never meant harm, but meaning doesn't erase impact." I turned to Elena. "You said it was just family at your wedding." She froze, unsure whether to apologize or defend herself. "I thought I wasn't family anymore," I continued. "But you were wrong." Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came. I picked up the envelope, opened it, and found a folded note, their request written in careful, hopeful ink, a plea for a home, wrapped in politeness. "I've already given you this house once," I said. "You just didn't see it." Daniel looked up. His eyes glistened. "I am sorry." It was the first true thing Head said all afternoon. I nodded. "I know you are." We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the rain began again, soft, steady, like forgiveness falling where it was needed most. I poured more tea, letting the sound fill the gaps between us. Then I reached into my drawer and handed Daniel a small envelope of my own. He looked at me, confused. "What's this?" "Something I wrote after the wedding," I said. He opened it slowly. Inside, a single line written in my handwriting. "Love without respect is not love at all." He stared at it for a moment, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Elena stood. "We should go," she said softly. "It's all right," I said. "You know where the key used to be, but it isn't there anymore." He nodded. He understood. At the door, he turned back. I don't deserve you, he said. Then become someone who does. After they left, I stood by the window and watched their car disappear down the wet road. The garden swayed in the wind. The lilies shed brought, already bowing under the rain. I didn't move to bring them inside. Some flowers aren't meant to last. The kettle whistled softly behind me. I turned it off and let the quiet return. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like absence. It felt like freedom. Days passed before I heard from them again. The phone remained silent, as if even technology understood that certain wounds required distance. For the first time in years, I didn't wait by the window. I didn't glance at the clock every hour. I didn't replay conversations, searching for hidden meanings. I simply lived. The mornings became mine again. I walked to the market, greeted the same vendors I'd ignored for months. I bought fresh bread, ripe pears, flowers that didn't remind me of anyone. People smiled differently when you stopped carrying sadness like luggage. One of them, an older man who sold herbs, said, "You look lighter." I smiled. I am. At home, I cooked enough for one and filled the second plate anyway, not out of longing, but out of habit. And each night, when I washed it untouched, I whispered, "Not for him, for me." A week later, Nora stopped by. She came with gossip disguised as concern, the kind small towns run on. I heard Daniel moved back into her parents' place. She began cautiously. "Really?" I said, stirring tea. Apparently, things aren't well between them. Money, expectations, all that. I nodded, letting her words settle like dust on the table. Nora leaned closer. "Hell, come around. You know, boys always do." I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile she expected. "I don't need him to come around," I said gently. "I just need him to live honestly." She blinked, unsure whether to pity or admire me. After she left, I sat by the window again, but this time it wasn't to watch the road, it was to watch the sky. 2 weeks later, Daniel came alone. No text beforehand. No warning. Just the sound of gravel crunching under tires. When I opened the door, he looked smaller. Somehow like the boy who used to come home after losing a soccer match. His eyes were tired, his voice low. "Can I come in?" "Of course," I said. He stepped inside, glancing at everything like a man seeing it for the first time. He looked at the table, the chairs, the photographs I'd put back on the walls. "I like what you've done," he said quietly. "Thank you." We sat across from each other. This time, no tea, no pretense of comfort. He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "She left," he said simply. I waited. She said she needed someone more ambitious. Someone who could give her more. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I nodded. "And what did you say?" He laughed softly, a bitter sound. "I told her I gave her everything I had." "Then she was right," I said. He looked up, startled. "People who demand more than everything," I continued, "will never be satisfied, not with you, not with anyone." He swallowed hard, staring at his hands. "I should have listened to you." "No," I said gently. "You should have listened to yourself." We sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore, the kind that settles things. Finally, he said, "I wanted to ask if maybe I could stay here for a bit. Just until I figure things out." I studied him, the exhaustion, the humility. For a moment, the mother in me wanted to say yes immediately. But the woman I had become knew better. "You can stay," I said, "but not as the boy who left. As the man who's learning to begin again." He nodded, eyes wet. "I'll earn my place, Ma." I smiled. "You already have by asking." That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, I cooked for two again. We ate in near silence, broken only by the occasional sound of a fork against porcelain. It wasn't awkward. It was peace rebuilding itself. After dinner, Daniel helped wash the dishes. He hesitated at one point, holding a glass carefully, almost reverently. "This was Dad's, wasn't it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "He believed in fixing what was broken." Daniel nodded. "So do I." Over the next few days, he started repairing small things around the house: the squeaky door, the loose step, the leaky faucet. I watched quietly from the window as he worked, sleeves rolled up, sunlight on his face. It reminded me of John. It reminded me of who Daniel used to be, and perhaps still was. One afternoon, I brought him lemonade. He wiped his brow and said, "Do you think he'd be proud of me?" I looked at him, really looked, and said, "He already was. Long before you thought you had to prove it. But peace doesn't come without shadow." The town talked. Some whispered that he'd come crawling back, others that it'd taken him in out of guilt. I ignored them. People love to measure forgiveness as weakness because they've never practiced it as strength. For me, forgiveness wasn't a surrender. It was a boundary. I wasn't erasing the past. I was redrawing it. A month later, Daniel found a new job in town. He came home one evening with paint on his hands and said, "I think I am ready to start fresh." I smiled. "Good. Then start where you stand." That night, we sat outside under the stars. He told me he'd been attending therapy, learning how to unlearn patterns of silence. "I think I understand you more now," he said. I chuckled. "That's dangerous, understanding your mother too well." He smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years, unguarded, honest. When he went to bed, I stayed on the porch. The air was cool, filled with the sound of crickets. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the humiliation, the quiet rebuild, and it occurred to me that justice doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes, it looks like a son coming home humbled, and a mother sitting in peace, not because she won, but because she no longer needs to. It's strange how peace arrives not like a sunrise, but like fog. You don't see it coming. You just look up one morning and realize the world is soft again. The house had changed, not in structure, but in energy. Where once there was waiting, now there was rhythm. Where once there was silence that hurt, now there was silence that healed. Daniel had found work painting houses for a local company. Each morning, I heard the sound of his boots leaving the porch, the door closing gently behind him. Every sound carried a memory, but not the kind that stabbed, the kind that hummed. He left small things for me to notice. A loaf of bread from the bakery, a note on the counter, a new flower planted by the fence. Nothing grand, just presence. Presence, I learned, is love's truest apology. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. There's a language beyond words, the way he fixed the squeaky hinges without being asked, the way I made his coffee, just the way he used to like it. That was our conversation now. Action, not explanation. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sky fade into amber. He said quietly, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought about that, about weddings missed, calls unanswered, tears swallowed. "I used to," I said, "but wishing doesn't rewrite what was lived. It only delays what can still be good." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You always make it sound simple. It isn't." I smiled. But simplicity is what truth looks like when it stops fighting. Sometimes I caught him glancing at his phone, as if waiting for something. Once, I asked, "Do you still talk to her?" He hesitated. "Not really. I tried. But she's moved on." I nodded. "Then you should too." He looked down. "I don't know how." I reached over, covered his hand with mine. "You start by forgiving the version of yourself who didn't know better." He exhaled a long, trembling breath, as if those words released a knot tied too tightly inside him. In the weeks that followed, he began painting again, not houses, but canvases. Had done it in college, before life became a checklist. One afternoon, he brought me a painting. It was simple. A small house by the sea. a single window glowing with warm light. "I don't remember the house looking this beautiful," I said. He smiled. "It didn't, but that's how I see it now." I hung it in the living room, where the sunlight touched it every morning. For the first time, art replaced memory. Life became ordinary again, beautifully ordinary. I started gardening more, planting vegetables I'd never grown before. Daniel helped build a small wooden bench by the fence. We didn't talk much while working, but the quiet between us was full like the earth, rich and ready. One afternoon, as we were digging, he said, "You know, I used to think strength meant not needing anyone." "And now?" I asked. He smiled. "Now I think strength is learning how to come back." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of soil and salt. It reminded me of the old house by the shore, the one John built, the one Daniel grew up in. Maybe love, like wind, never really disappears, it just changes direction. That evening, we ate dinner outside. The table was simple: bread, soup, and the faint glow of a lantern between us. Halfway through, he said, "Thank you for letting me stay." I looked at him, truly looked, not as a boy I lost, but as a man who'd found his way back through humility. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "This was always your home. You just forgot the way." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "You sound like Dad." "Do I?" He used to say things like that. I laughed softly. "Then maybe he's been here all along." Later, after he went to bed, I stayed outside. The night air was cool, the garden alive with crickets. I thought about forgiveness, how it doesn't arrive as a grand gesture, but as a quiet acceptance that what broke you also built you. I looked up at the stars, steady, patient, unchanged, and whispered, "I forgive him. I forgive her. I forgive me." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They simply landed somewhere deep, somewhere final. The next morning, Daniel left early for work. On the counter, he left a note. "Dinner's on me tonight. Don't cook. Just rest." I smiled as I read it. Then I opened the window and let the morning light pour in. The air smelled of salt and possibility. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman waiting for life to return. I felt like a woman already living it. Because healing, I realized, isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about discovering that you never needed it to be whole. There is a moment after every storm when you walk outside, expecting to see ruin, and instead you find stillness, not because nothing broke, but because what remains finally belongs to you. That's what healing feels like. For a long time, I believed love was something to protect, something to hold with both hands, as if it might fly away. But love isn't a fragile bird. It's the air we breathe even after the bird is gone. I used to measure life in relationships: wife, mother, widow. Each title felt like a room I was supposed to live in forever. When one collapsed, I thought I'd lost myself. But losing isn't the same as ending. Sometimes, it's how you begin again. And people ask how I forgave. The truth is, forgiveness didn't come all at once. It arrived in small doses, in the way I washed his cup without resentment, in the way I stopped rehearsing speeches he would never hear, in the way I allowed myself to smile at memories that once hurt. Forgiveness, I learned, is not about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the hook entirely. If I could speak to the woman I was a year ago, the one standing by the window, phone trembling in her hand, I would tell her this: you will survive the sentence that begins with, "We got married yesterday." You will survive the silence that follows. And one day, you will wake up and realize you no longer need an apology. Because pain changes its shape over time. At first, it feels like drowning. Then, it becomes a current, something that moves through you, not against you. And if you let it, it will carry you somewhere gentler. I've also learned that motherhood isn't a lifetime of being needed. It's a lifetime of being remembered, sometimes too late, sometimes not at all. But even then, love leaves fingerprints. They don't fade. They just stop hurting when you touch them. When Daniel came home, I thought our story was starting again. It wasn't. It was simply finishing in peace instead of pain. There's a difference between reunion and repair. Reunion is when you return to what broke you. Repair is when you build something new from what remains. We chose repair. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit by the window with tea and listen to the quiet hum of the world outside. Children laughing in the distance, dogs barking, wind brushing through leaves. All ordinary sounds. But ordinary is where miracles hide. I no longer crave grand gestures or happy endings. Happiness, I've found, is often just the absence of noise, the moment when you realize nothing is missing. The older I get, the more I understand that dignity is not silence, it's restraint. It's the choice to speak only when it will bring light, not fire. When Daniel hurt me, my instinct was to shout. But shouting is what pain does when it wants company. Silence, when chosen, is what strength does when it wants peace. And that peace, I've learned, is not quietness outside you. It's quietness inside you. If someone were to ask what my story is about, I would say, it isn't about betrayal, it's about belonging, and how sometimes the only place you truly belong is within yourself. We all spend years trying to return to people who made us feel safe, when in truth, safety is what we build when we stop chasing and start standing still. When I look at my son now, I no longer see the boy I raised or the man who hurt me. I see a human being flawed, fragile, trying. And that, I think, is the highest form of love. To see someone without needing them to be perfect again. There's a quote I once read, I can't remember where that said, "What you survive becomes your name." If that's true, then my name is not widow, or mother, or woman left behind. It is still here. And that is enough. The sea called to me again that morning. It had been years since I'd gone back, not out of fear, but because some places feel heavier when visited too soon. Now, it felt right. I packed a small bag, a thermos of tea, a notebook, John's old watch. Daniel offered to drive me, but I said no. Some journeys, I told him, are meant to be taken alone. The road to the shore was lined with wildflowers, the same ones that used to grow near our old house. Their colors were softer now, but maybe it was me who'd changed. Maybe my eyes no longer searched for brightness, but for balance. When I reached the beach, the tide was low, the sand cool beneath my feet. I walked until the water touched my ankles, and for a long time, I simply stood there. The sea doesn't care about human grief. It keeps moving, steady and certain, washing away what refuses to stay. And yet, standing there, I felt it listening not to my words, but to the quiet I carried. I took out John's watch and held it up to the light. It had stopped years ago, the hands frozen at 11:47, the exact minute Head died. I smiled. "You've been patient," I whispered. "But I think it's time." I wound it once, gently. The ticking returned faint, rhythmic, alive. It didn't sound like the past. It sounded like the present saying, "I am still here." I sat on a driftwood log and poured tea from the thermos. Steam curled into the morning air, vanishing like breath. I thought about everything that had happened, the call, the silence, the slow rebuild of love. If someone had told me then that I would end up here whole, unhurried, alone but not lonely, I wouldn't have believed them. But that's the quiet truth about survival. You don't feel it happening. You only notice once you stop hurting. Behind me, I heard footsteps. When I turned, Daniel was standing there hesitant, wind in his hair, the same uncertain smile he wore as a child. "I couldn't let you come alone," he said. I smiled. "You already did." He sat beside me. We said nothing. The waves spoke for us, each one arriving, breaking, returning a rhythm that needed no translation. After a while, he reached into his pocket and handed me something small. A key. "The spare one," he said. "The one you threw into the sea." I laughed softly. "You found it?" He shook his head. "No, I made a new one." It wasn't just a key. It was an understanding, quiet, mutual, whole. The wind picked up, scattering sand across our feet. Daniel looked out at the water. "What now?" he asked. I watched the horizon, endless, calm, silver. "Now," I said, "we let life be kind again." When we left, I didn't look back. The sea had already taken what it needed. The rest, peace, forgiveness, dignity, was mine to keep. And as we drove home, I looked at my son's reflection in the window, his eyes steady on the road ahead, and for the first time in many years, I didn't see the boy who left me. I saw the man who came back. And that, I thought, was enough of a miracle for one life.